Hi, so thank you for having me. Yesterday, I published a piece in the Dispatch with my colleague Jonathan Shanzer, sort of laying out what we think should happen next after the death of Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar last week. And the gist of our piece is that the U.S. should take this opportunity to press the Qataris to extradite Hamas leaders uh, who are still based there. The Qataris can extradite them, freeze their assets, and force Hamas leaders to surrender. And we argue that that would really bring about a swift end to the fighting in Gaza.
Extradite them to where?
To the US or even to Israel. I think the case against Khaled Meshal, who is currently serving in a role that's kind of like Hamas's foreign minister, the Department of Justice actually brought terrorism charges against him last month. So there's solid ground there for Meshal to be extradited to the United States.
Yeah. I'm a little old-fashioned about this stuff, and I look at that and I say, this isn't a crime wave, it's a war. Why not just kill them?
I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I mean, for starters, the current leaders of Hamas are currently residing in Qatar. Qatar is a major non-NATO ally that is home to the largest U.S. airbase in the region. So going after them in that country is a lot more complicated than going after terrorist leaders inside Gaza or even in southern Lebanon.
Gotcha. James?
Yeah, I mean, I think Natalie and his analysis is largely definitely that's one good avenue that we could pursue. To John Alterman, who was president for Middle East Affairs at CSIS, when I was researching the piece that we wrote at the Morning Dispatch about Gaza. I also spoke to Danny Pletka at AEI, and both of them were, short of Qatar, extraditing and making this major international move. Both of them were pretty pessimistic about this as an immediate end to the fighting, largely because a fragmented Hamas doesn't mean a Hamas that doesn't want to fight anymore. They both pointed out that just Sinwar has been running around tunnels for the past year. The extent of top-down control he actually had over Hamas in terms of command and control is somewhat limited. So it doesn't really change the initial momentum of fighting. They did point out there is one glimmer of hope in terms of hostages, in that there might be some people who are holding hostages whose location only was available to Sinwar, who might now be willing to abandon or make deals about those hostages.
Yeah. And I'm sorry if I often sound like a sort of a boob or a troglodyte on this stuff, but I can't imagine why the Israelis would want an immediate end to fighting when they are winning.
Well, I mean, I guess the kind of question is more, I should rephrase that. The question is more, is Hamas exhausted now as a force in the field? And the answer is no. And also there's the question of they're going to have to pivot more to Lebanon. And then, as Pletka kept stressing to me, Daniel Pletka, eventually to Iran. And so there are literally bigger fish to fry.
Yeah. So where do we see this unfolding in the next, say, 2 to 5 weeks? Natalie, what do you think is the most likely future moving scenario from here?
I think we're going to see a lot of what we've seen over the past few months. Secretary Blinken is in the region this week. He was in Israel today. He's going to be in Qatar later this week. And the administration, as far as I'm reading, is really seeing this post-Sinwar era as an opportunity to kind of move ceasefire and hostage talks forward. And so I think we're going to see a lot of the same processes and back and forth that we've seen over the last few months. And unfortunately, those haven't really gotten us anywhere. Hope springs eternal that something will develop in the next few weeks, but I'm not super hopeful that anything's really going to change.
James?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Natalie, and I just add the basic problem is that for leaders to gain legitimacy in Gaza right now, the best way for them to do that is to demonstrate that they fight against Israel and that they fight for Palestinians or Gazans as in the way that they see it. And so that cuts directly against the chance of making kind of a ceasefire deal. The same dynamics that propelled Sinwar into his kind of revered role as leader of Hamas, as this kind of like implacable foe of Israel, are going to apply to the next leader as well, no matter who that is.
Yeah. How much real influence does the United States currently have with the Israeli government?
I would say more than is often said in the media, I think, who kind of like to portray Israel as this loose cannon that's doing whatever it's want a lot of the time. I should say the mainstream media. Israeli forces have tailored operations in the past few months several times, based around U.S. requests. Slowing down the level of advance, changing the targets of strike, and we have good reporting now that they've probably are not likely to target Iranian nuclear or energy facilities in their strike in the next week or so, due to prompting from the Biden administration.
And why is the Biden administration prompting them not to do that?
I could punt that to Natalie.
Sure.
I was going to say, I think very simply, there's this chronic fear of escalating to the point of no return, and striking Iran's nuclear sites sort of pushes us closer to that threshold.
I see. So it's a fear of Iranian retaliation, or?
Correct.
And I think just spreading across the region in general, and I'd add again, Danielle Pletka from AI stressed to me, in her view, and I'm referring to her expertise, not mine, that the only way that this quote unquote ends is if Iran is hit so hard that they're forced to recalibrate their entire strategy of proxies and missiles and strikes against Israel. And so we'll see if an Israeli strike that avoids these major sites can accomplish that.
And do we think that's what the Israelis want to accomplish, to hit Iran so hard that they rethink their strategy of using proxies and missiles?
Well, I don't know the mind of their kind of Council of State, but I would rather not have Hezbollah shooting at me if I was Israel. I'd rather have them afraid of doing that. So
yes, but I suppose there's more than one way to get there, right? And a confrontation with Iran obviously is a very serious thing, a more serious thing than a confrontation with Hamas, even though Hamas is essentially a facet of Iranian foreign policy. So I suppose I'm wondering, from what's publicly available, obviously we don't have secret sources inside the Israeli government or anything, but about what they think their odds are of getting what they want out of this, as opposed to just fighting for survival. I seem to have asked a difficult question that no one wants to answer, so that's okay.
Can you clarify what you mean by getting what they want out of?
Sure. Well, there are a couple of ways to look at this, I suppose. One is that Israel has an immediate short-term problem of these missiles coming down on them, this conflict they're involved in that they would like to not be involved in because they'd like to not be shot at. They'd like to go back to living their lives and being as much of an ordinary country as they can be. They have a longer-term problem in the fact that they're surrounded by countries and entities that would like to eliminate them, both as individual Jews and corporately as a Jewish state. And dealing with the first problem and dealing with the second problem are separate things. And now, presumably, if you could deal with the second problem in a credible and robust and durable sort of way, then your first problem is more or less taken care of at that point. Taking care of the first problem doesn't necessarily take care of the second problem. So I suppose what I'm asking is, do they think that they're better off fighting to yet another unsatisfying stalemate at this point? Or do they think that perhaps they're actually better off with the thing that we keep saying that we don't want, which is escalation? Because there is a military and strategic and political case for escalation.
My extremely fallible judgment of Israeli actions over the past several months and year is that they're much closer to just we're going to settle all the scores than in previous conflicts. This is not like 2007, 2008, for example, in the war in Lebanon. And they've also been much more successful than a lot of people have expected them to be. I mean, the conventional wisdom from not unserious people, like serious military analysts, was that it would be a very, very hard-fought struggle in Gaza. And while it has been, in terms of human cost, in terms of actual casualties to Israelis, it's been very much lower than expected. The same can be for Lebanon. The conventional wisdom was that, Hamas are amateurs, Hezbollah is the real deal. They're not afraid of Israel. And Hezbollah has folded like a wet piece of paper. So I think they've seen a bigger field of action than they have in years past.
Yeah. Natalie, closing thoughts?
I largely agree with that analysis. Yeah, I largely agree with that analysis. I think, you know, I don't have a crystal ball and I can't predict where and when this broader war is going to end, but I do agree that the Israelis seem to be capitalizing on this momentum and going for achieving a much larger goal, much broader goal than they have in the past.
Great. James, any last parting thoughts?
No, I definitely think Natalie and I are in strong agreement here. But I will say, in terms of those hoping for conclusion to the fighting, to a quick return of the hostages, and for an alleviation of the humanitarian situation, it's Sinwar's death does not change a huge amount on any of those fronts.
How much do we think there are still hostages to return?
I spoke to an expert in hostage retrieval who said there's about 100 left, but that's like the general estimate. I mean, it could be lower by the day. It's really hard to say.
This is the general estimate from Israeli intelligence, or?
Yeah, I think a variety of sources, but I think that's what the Israelis at least are letting people know what they think, if that makes sense, or publicly willing to say, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both very much for your contributions, for your time. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope to talk to you both again sometime soon.
Thanks very much, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you. That wraps us up for the week. Thank you all for being the Dispatch, and we will talk to you next week.